Hello, welcome to another cemetery episode. This one's actually taken care of very well. Today we're at Pioneer Cemetery, located in Greene, Ohio, Trumbull County. Alternative names, just one, Greene Cemetery. So let's go meet some local residents and hear their story. A little history about this one. Unknown from my reads on establishment date, but Find a Grave shows a Mary A. Williams as the earliest entry with a death year of 1813. If accurate, this might be the oldest cemetery we visited so far, over 200 years old now. The Ohio Genealogy Guide states that this cemetery is moderately maintained. From my understanding, that equals like once a year cleanup. Headstones are obviously in rough shape at this one, you'll see during the tour, but not too bad overall as far as upkeep. It's actually one of the cleaner cemeteries we've been to. Today, we'll meet a man who battled off wolves with a stick while protecting his sheep, learn of a ragtag group of fighters named the Squirrel Hunters Regiment during the Civil War, and one member of which is buried at this cemetery. Sadly, stop by the memorial of a Civil War prisoner who did not make it home, meet an individual who's the grandson of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and finally, hear the story of a defiant Quaker woman during the 1600s who refused to back down from the Puritans in Massachusetts, who went to great lengths to silence her, at one point even digging up her stillborn to destroy her reputation and tell the public of her monstrous birth, using it as a sign of God and a bad omen. So that should be a great story. Here is Enoch Rice. I think I found him. Oldest birth year in the cemetery per Find a Grave of 1747. I feel like that's a record for this channel if accurate. He is also a rare find for us, a Revolutionary War soldier, and started his service in 1776. He was born in Westborough, Massachusetts, aka at this time the Massachusetts Bay Colony, British colonial America. Here's a map from 1688 showing the territories actually. That's not all that was going on in colonial America during the 1600s, by the way. I came across the story of Mary Dyer, an English and colonial Puritan who turned to Quaker. Why is Mary observed here in the old painting being led to the gallows? Let's find out why. Mary's story goes all the way back to London in 1611 when she was born. She would marry in England in 1633, and at this time her and her husband were Puritans, were interested in reforming the church but didn't want to separate from it. Charles I said, no, that's not happening, and increased pressure on the Puritans. It got to the point where a good number of Puritans left England for America, Mary and her husband being two of them, arriving in Boston in 1635. They would join a new church and get involved with the Free Grace controversy, basically a political and religious conflict, but the drama caused them some major issues and they left Massachusetts for Rhode Island. However, Mary had bigger problems brewing. Before leaving Boston, she gives birth to a deformed infant that was stillborn. During this time in the world and religious superstitions, the infant was secretly buried, just so it would cause her no problems. However, the Massachusetts authority find out and label her infant had a monstrous birth. And this is a belief back then, that a birth defect of this magnitude was taken as a religious omen, sign of God, or moral warnings. The authorities, of course, jump right on this, make it public, humiliating her, and they use it to manipulate people, saying the monstrous birth was clearly due to Mary's religious beliefs. To add, and this is really messed up, they dig up her stillborn infant. Governor Winthrop writes in his journal upon seeing the infant, to quote, "It was of ordinary bigness, it had a face but no head, and the ears stood upon the shoulders and were like apes. It had no forehead, but over the eyes 4 horns, hard and sharp. 2 of them were above 1 inch long, the other 2 shorter, the eyes standing out and the mouth also, the nose hooked upward, all over the breast and back of sharp pricks and scales, like a thornback. The navel and all the belly, with the distinction of the sex, were in the back where should be, and the back and the hips before. Where the belly should have been, behind, between the shoulders, it had 2 mouths, and each of them piece of red flesh sticking out. It had arms and legs as other children, but instead of toes, it had on each foot 3 claws like a fowl, with sharp talons." End of quote, and probably a bit exaggerated, I'm sure. Mary did have supporters, one saying Winthrop's description was just an issue with his brain. That was a good rip. However, Mary boards a ship to England and she stays there for a few years, converting to Quakerism, classified as one of the most dangerous of the heretics by the Puritans. Massachusetts actually went out of their way to make special laws against the Quakers. Two Quakers in particular, William Robinson and Marmaduke Stevison, were arrested. Mary hears of it and goes to Boston to support them, ignoring her previous banishment. Obviously gets arrested on spot and goes before the governor before sentencing. The governor states, "Mary Dyer, you shall go hence to the place from whence you came, and then from thence to the place of execution, and there be hanged till you be dead." She replies, "The will of the Lord be done." When the governor directed the marshal to take her away, she said, "Yeah, and joyfully I go," sort of like just poking at him even more. Mary accepted as a witness, willing to die for her religious beliefs. Even when sentenced to death, she kept challenging the Puritans. Reading up on this, 3 are walked to the gallows. Mary would watch her 2 friends hung one by one. She goes up to the gallows, has her hands and legs bound and face covered. However, there's one last-ditch effort by her son to petition for her hanging, and it works. She gets pulled from the gallows, but she does write a letter the same day that she rejects the petition and is prepared to die. She would return to Boston and go before the governor. She stood pretty calm and continued to defy him to the point where he gets like pretty pissed off and orders her away, and then orders her to be hanged at the gallows again. Here's a painting from the 19th century showing her being led to the gallows in 1860. I guess the pastor gives her one last chance to repent, and she says, "No thanks." To add further insult to them, the pastor asks if she wants the elders to pray for her. She simply replies, "I know never an elder here." I get the feeling Mary was a big of a smartass at this point. Finally, she swung off a tree limb and hung. It's interesting because one officer, Edwin Wanton, who witnessed Mary's hanging, became so overwhelmed by the experience, he converts to Quakerism and becomes a prominent figure in the Quaker religion. To add, one of Mary's prosecutors falls off his horse and dies. Some Quakers claim that it was God's wrath that took his life for the cruelty he showed her. Sadly, things didn't get better for the Quakers. Massachusetts takes it a step further. They created the cart and tail law in 1661, 1 year after Mary's hanging. Quakers could be tied to carts, stripped naked, dragged through towns, and whipped out of the colony territory. However, Mary's remembered by a statue that sits outside the Massachusetts State House in her honor. Well, this is kind of sad. The Find the Grave picture shows Aaron Rice's headstone like upright, but it appears it's in 3 pieces now. It appears the Rices were heavily involved with the Revolutionary War per this random website I came across. A lot of them resided in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and South Carolina mentioned. In fact, even in old age, they offered help in providing supplies, horses, and wagons, for example. Aaron here in particular was from Connecticut. And up ahead is the Harrington Memorial. We're interested in William Harrington's story though. He was born in Vermont in 1794 and well educated during this time in the country. There were 6 original purchasers of the land in this area, William being one of them in 1817, and super exciting, he purchased the very first 2 sheep in the township. So a very cool piece of history there for you. But there's even more excitement. One day as dusk approached, William noticed he was being followed, not by humans, but by wolves, and he was walking his sheep home from what I read. At one point, they begin to howl, indicating they were calling for backup. William then makes a fighting stick out of hickory on the spot, preparing to fight them off, and he indeed does. During the first fight, he held the sheep in one place with one hand while fighting off the wolves with the other. Dude really wanted his sheep. Apparently he had to fend them off 3 more times before reaching his barn. I think I found Major Churchill's headstone, which I think might be right there. Cool name, but he would be the first postmaster in Greene Township. A little scarce on information, but Dr. Edwin M. Bailey is displayed here. He is also listed as a Civil War veteran, joining the Squirrel Hunters Brigade. In 1862, Southern Ohio was expecting a Confederate Army invasion. So Governor David Todd called upon Ohioans to form up militia companies to protect the Ohio border. 16,000 men and boys would respond by showing up in random gear to fight, carrying a rifle. I guess people were like, who the hell are these guys? So the Squirrel Hunters name sort of stuck with them. I could only find one pic online in some random Civil War forum, but this is the average look of them. The Confederates luckily did not reach the Ohio River, and the men were sent home, but the Ohio State representative identified their service and gave them discharge papers to honor their response to protect the state. It appears Orrin was in Trumbull County crew. Probably the saddest story in this cemetery belongs to Edwin Bailey, born right here in Greene, Ohio. He is a Civil War veteran serving in the 6th Ohio Volunteer Cavalry. One of the battles listed for the 6th was the Second Battle of Bull Run, taking place August 28th. General Lee would lead the Confederates in this particular battle and do a number on the Union force, as they lost 14,000 soldiers in the fight compared to Lee's 1,000. The Union force would retreat to Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C. The reason I mention that specifically is because Edwin is listed as dying at a very young age of 20 in October of 1862 in Washington, 1 month after the Bull Run battle. An online note mentions that there's possibly a memorial for him at the U.S. Soldiers and Airmen's Home National Cemetery. Edwin, from my readings, was sadly captured by the Confederates and placed in the famous Libby Prison, a place famous for all the wrong reasons. As discussed in previous videos, a Civil War prison is the last place you want to be during this time. Mortality rates were very high on both the Union and Confederate sides, especially the Confederate side, who severely lacked medicine, doctors, and food. Because of this, Northern Union supporters were vocal, demanding that Confederate soldiers get equal treatment. It led to terrible conditions, but I think this hits home and relates to Edwin's early death here, who was in pretty bad state, I'm guessing, when he was released from the prison. Lauren Foote, a professor of history, wrote, "The suffering of prisoners did more to inhibit post-war reconciliation than any other episode of the war." It does say that he does have a marker at the Home National Cemetery. However, Edwin's headstone here out in the quiet countryside of Ohio sits broken in half. Another reminder of old cemeteries fading fast. Man, it's kind of odd, like, find a grave, all these headstones are upright and repaired in current day, and 2026 they're all knocked over and damaged, and I don't know if there was a recent vandalism event, but wow. We're looking at Thomas P. Williams. I think this is him here. Couldn't find much on him. The headstones were obviously in red shape, but there's a note that Thomas P. Williams is apparently the grandson of William Williams, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There is one odd story I came across in this cemetery, and that's of Elmer Clyde French. In November of 1940, Elmer's mother, Nancy French, died at the old age of 89. Elmer took it very hard, and the very next day, he sets fire to the house and then shoots himself in the head. He set fire to the house to make sure of his death, and we know this because he put letters in several neighbors' mailboxes notifying them of his intentions. Elmer also mentions that he had a fear of being in the poorhouse, but describes a jar with $205 buried underneath a woodpile, as the state was offering assistance to him and his mother. No grave markers for these individuals, so unsure where they're located, but they are listed on Find a Grave of being at this cemetery. Alright, time for the tour. When you first walk in, there must have been a veteran here. And given the state of the headstones, not surprising that maybe it's missing or severely damaged. There's Enoch. Actually a Revolutionary War soldier, right? But yeah, this one's had quite the number done on it. Wow, this one must be really old school. I can't see anything on there, but it looked very elegant at one time. That guy's name was what? Major Churchill? That was a pretty badass name. First postmaster in Greene, I believe. Yeah, this is a big issue. I noticed a lot of them that fell over are face down. Can't really see who it is, but someone's mowing the lawn at least, so that's cool. But overall, yeah, you can see, especially this guy, looks like it's been broken multiple times. Believe it or not, that is a headstone. Nice day though. My last day in Ohio, visiting home, so I feel bad. I drug my dad out here, but I don't think he minds. He likes going all these places. There's Edwin. We talked about his unfortunate end. Yeah, it's always fun to drive out in the middle of nowhere and see all the sights. When we drove here, we saw 2 planes in a field with the wings ripped off, so that was interesting. This is wild. It's like weathered away so much that the face fell off where all the writing used to be. And I definitely highly recommend this one just for the pretty drive out in the Ohio country. I think it says, I don't know, something Ard. Very much weathered. Wales, U.S. veteran. I don't know if I saw his story. Big one of Boscombe. Small one, but a lot of history. Hope you enjoyed the long, drawn-out story of Mary Dyer, but that was a good look into the 1600s and religion. Anywho, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're doing good. Springtime, it's a little warm out. If you have any other recommendations for cemeteries to visit in Oregon, because this is an Oregon channel, I always say that when I visit Ohio, and got our first Pennsylvania cemetery coming up soon, or before this. If you have any recommendations, feel free to comment below. Hope you're doing good, and enjoy the nice weather and this pond view ahead. Thanks for watching. Bye.